Antonovsky Bridge was the site of a significant detonation. One of Russia's most important transportation corridors took a significant hit at the hands of the Ukrainian army. A surprise attack was carried out on the train that was transporting a significant quantity of ammunition to the Russians. The Ukrainian army was able to get this advantage, which made things very difficult for the Russian army. The explosion on the Antonovka Bridge, which is widely regarded as the most significant of the ammunition routes del Russia, a fatal setback. Putin was at a loss for what to do when Ukrainian soldiers began advancing towards Sadar. Following the occurrence of this particular event, the public's response to Putin began to snowball into an avalanche. During the conflict between Russia and Ukraine, Moscow descended into complete anarchy. Dominance lines in Russia have recently become the target of an offensive by the Russian. The operation that was carried out by the Ukrainian army intended to deliver a significant blow to Russia by cutting these lines. A decision was made by Ukrainian military personnel to carry out an operation on the Antonovka Bridge in order to make the most of the advantage they currently hold. However, in order to begin this operation, it was essential to first gather useful. The Ukrainian army's first job was to find out when this train carrying weapons would arrive at the Antonovka Bridge. Ukrainian reconnaissance troops have established a long-term watch position. After maintaining vigilance for roughly a month, the Ukrainian army was able to collect the essential intelligence. As soon as the Ukrainian government learned that the train runs every Thursday, arrangements were made to operate in that. Almost immediately after receiving this piece of intelligence, Ukraine began to set up hurdles in order for them to be able to see the train. But more importantly, that occurred almost immediately after. Despite the fact that the Ukrainian military intended to break up the bridge using sea power, the bridge piers were quite sturdy. Because of this, the forces of Ukraine devised a cunning. This operation was made much easier by the assistance that was provided to Ukraine by the United States and a large number of European countries. However, when the actual equipment and vehicles arrived, everything changed dramatically because of the actions taken by the Ukrainian army. Even the tiniest possibility that Moscow still possessed has begun to vanish. The most important information that can be found: the fact that Russia was the first nation in the history of the operation to arrive by train completely altered the direction that it would take. However, the intelligence that the train would be closely secured brought up the issue of the possibility that half of the Ukrainian army would be involved in the operation. It was common knowledge that Moscow was gearing up for a significant assault on this, because it was unable to put many of the advantages it had acquired to use as each Western nation realized that Ukraine would need all of the resources at its disposal to successfully repel this assault. They began to provide Ukraine with an increasing amount of support, one after the other. However, a more fundamental solution was required for the Ukrainian force. This served as a timely reminder of how important it was for Ukraine to shut off supply lines to these ammunition storage facilities. This assignment was given to Ukrainian special forces who were armed with hammers and rocket launchers and lined up to carry it out. Following the placement of the seaports beneath the bridge, the Barak vehicles were moved to a location nearby where they could be easily located in the event that they were required. However, once everyone saw the Russian train, their opinions regarding the operation completely. The Ukrainian forces became aware of this fact. After observing the approaching Russian train, there was a military train on its way. Because of this, there was going to be a significant risk to the operation. During the time that the hammers were preparing to discharge, the rocket launchers were also being ready. Both were subsequently killed, and the operation then got underway. However, when the armored train proceeded on its way with very little, the Ukrainian military started to become concerned that the operation would not be successful. The operation consisted solely of the discharge of weapons at the train by Ukrainian special forces, the appearance of drones tasked with protecting the train from above, and nothing else serious danger. In the event that the Ukrainian army was unsuccessful in detonating this ammunition train, the Russian army would advance on Kiev with a very large. The apartments of the bridge were used as a search area for naval forces by the Ukrainian military. However, at this juncture in the battle, the Ukrainian army held the upper hand before entering the adjacent forest. The Ukrainian soldiers had previously instructed Abrams and Leopard in this manner. Because of this, the operation that the Ukrainian army was conducting occurred at a very different location. The tanks initially planned to attack but when they saw that they couldn't, they changed their strategy. It was decided to blow up the sea force just as the ammunition truck went by, while the armored train was still around it. At this precise instant, synchronized fire was going to be launched at the abuts of the bridge, and the bridge was going to be completely destroyed by the explosion. The train went onto the bridge so that it could travel through this region according to information that has recently come to. The third core of the bridge houses the biggest explosive depot. Using this to their advantage, the Ukrainian forces moved in to carry out one of the most crucial parts of the operation as Russian drones attacked Ukrainian soldiers from above. The third car of the Russian train crossed the crossing. At this precise instant, all of the cannons were directed toward the base of the bridge and discharged. The bridge was destroyed with a great deal of force in spite of the fact that it was a heavily fortified railway, the wagon on the sea force caused a significant explosion. This resulted in the bridge exploding with the same intensity as before, and in reality, the Russian force was responsible for blowing up the bridge. This time, the HKS began to aim their weapons in the direction of the Ukrainian special forces as they moved in to pursue the drone. However, at this point in time, the Russian drones had made significant advancements. The individuals in control of these vehicles saw all of these images, so they communicated their findings to the Russian headquarters in that region and started directing them to that region. When the Ukrainian forces became aware of this, they immediately began making hasty movements in an attempt to flee. At this moment, near the reactor, one of the most potent weapons in the Ukraine's arsenal came into play. Direct observations were able to pinpoint the locations where the forces were entering this region. Bombs began falling on the tanks and vehicles that were located in this region. Shortly after, it was discovered that there was no nearby air defense system. This allowed the Ukrainian soldiers some time to escape while the Russian troops remained stationed in the. It was predicted that this significant blow would cause tens of millions of dollars worth of damage to the Russian army. Putin was at a loss to explain why Russia, which was already struggling severely on the economic front, was dealt such a setback. Putin made the decision to assemble a squad to conduct an investigation into the headquarters. Putin had to put off his big attack because the commanders in the area couldn't figure out how the Ukrainian army got this information. So, Putin dismissed all of the commanders, with the Ukrainian army getting such a significant advantage. Putin wants to pursue the fact that Russian soldiers were unable to take refuge in the HQ because they were not given the necessary ammunition. This prevented them from taking cover there. Putin was forced to take action to resolve this logistical issue because the Russian army had created such a tense environment. Despite his efforts, he did not have an option A number of Russian fighters started to turn themselves into the Ukrainian front bit by bit. These soldiers are doomed to perish one after the other as a direct result of the inadequate equipment, ammunition, and supplies that are located in the supply corridors. This situation is being taken as important that the Russian force is facing significant problems within its ranks at the present. This circumstance, which has made it possible for Ukraine to apply such a significant amount of pressure in recent times, has started to demonstrate that Russia has now entered into an unimaginable cycle. Despite the fact that it is common knowledge that Russia is continuing to cause trouble with their operations, it was discovered that the Ukrainian forces was able to take all of Russia's new weapons because of its most recent right. This means that Russian soldiers will be able to use equipment that was made in the Soviet Union. Again, because of this, the Russian army will lose all of their upcoming battles. It is not yet known precisely what the Ukrainian army will do. However, it estimated that if it continues these operations, it will move Russia in the opposite direction of where it is currently moving. This circumstance has started to give the impression that it will clear the way for Russia's exit from the conflict. Analysts of the conflict believe that the present path that Ukraine is taking makes it easier for Russia to be boxed in should these developments continue. Ukraine will be presented with a significant possibility. The Russian army will be sufficiently cornered as a result, and if this situation persists, it will only be a matter of time before the Russians withdraw and surrender. Russia and Ukraine are now being joined in their conflict by another country. A Russian army contingent numbering 10,000 strong has been dispatched to the frontier of Finland by President Vladimir Putin of Russia along the border separating Finland and Russia. The Finnish military has recently begun stationing a significant number of armored vehicles, and the conflict that has been going on between Russia and Ukraine is now entering a new phase in the midst of everyone around the globe waiting for the war to be over. Russian President Vladimir Putin is beginning a new invasion. Putin, who has been threatening European countries since the beginning of the war, is attempting to get European countries to cut their support for Ukraine by using aggressive. He has been doing this since the conflict began. All of the Western nations had high praise for the Ukrainian army, which in the early months of the conflict put up a valiant fight against the Russian troops that had invaded their territory. The Ukrainian army was able to gain a large number of friends as a result of its incredible resistance. During the middle of the war, the U.S. was the only country helping the Ukrainian army. However, by the end of the war, almost every country in Europe was on their side in the middle of the conflict. Many Western countries like Germany, France, Britain, and Poland use their military to help the Ukrainian army. Neutral nations have provided the Ukrainian military with various types of equipment. The stockpile of the Ukrainian army has undergone a significant. On the other hand, Vladimir Putin has utilized a variety of strategies in order to discourage Western nations from providing assistance for Ukraine. Putin has threatened to shut off European countries' natural gas supplies by using his natural gas and oil reserves as a weapon. He has made this threat to European countries after repeatedly cutting off the flow of natural gas too. Putin was forced to reopen the flow of natural gas because Germany wouldn't give up. The government of Finland, which is one of the countries supporting Ukraine, is the first country to implement sanctions and embargoes on Russian goods. This is because Vladimir Putin needs money to finance Russian soldiers fighting in Ukraine. After the outbreak of war, Prime Minister Sanna Marin insisted that Russia be subject to a visa embargo, and she also ordered that Russian citizens be prevented from entering Finland. Sanna Marin asked all European countries to ban Russian citizens from getting visas, saying that Russian citizens shouldn't be able to travel in Europe as long as the Russian army is on Ukrainian land. The demand was made during a meeting of the European Union, and it was delivered by Sanna. On the other hand, the requests made by Sanna Marin were not met with approval from the member states of the European Union, even though they were turned down. The Prime Minister of Finland has put a new ban on giving visas to people who live in Russia. Citizens of Russia who are interested in traveling to Finland will now have to apply for one of a limited number of permits. Only 2 out of every 10 Russian citizens who live in Russia and want to go to Finland will be allowed to enter. Country. Vladimir Putin, the leader of Russia, has expressed his displeasure with Finland's decision. Nevertheless, it was Finland's decision to deploy tanks to Ukraine that was the final straw for Putin and caused him to lose his temper. The past few weeks have seen Finland provide the Ukrainian army with 3 Leopard 2 tanks, which has driven the leader of Russia, Vladimir Putin, completely. Despite its proximity to Russia, Finland has maintained its support for the Ukrainian forces by publicly challenging Putin. Putin was so angry about the situation that he decided to send 10,000 Russian soldiers to the border with Finland. The delivery of military supplies began in the Leningrad Oblast, which is located on Russia's border with Finland. Putin, who had previously dispatched 20 Russian T-72 tanks and 30 armored vehicles to the completed border, then dispatched a Russian battalion consisting of 10,000 personnel to the Leningrad region. After Russia stationed troops near Finland's frontier, the Finnish government decided to take action and began implementing new security measures along Russia's border with Finland. The Finnish government has started to establish new fronts on the Russian, and they have already sent a large number of troops, 2 tanks and soldiers to Kola, which is Finland's border city with Russia. Kola is located in the southwest corner of Finland. During the past few months, the Finn army has been constructing fences and walls along the border with Russia because they almost had the impression that Russia would invade Finland. 12. Leopard 2, manufactured in Germany, were among the equipment that the Finnish government dispatched to the border with Russia. In addition to this, it began making preparations for defense against Russian troops and placed an order for new tanks with its allies in Germany in the region designated by the one in color Finnish. Soldiers have begun to create new fronts and physic. The Finnish army, which numbers 20,000 strong, has started making preparations on the border with Russia and is getting ready to defend itself against an assault by Russian troops. After moving from St. Petersburg, the Russian forces have already begun to move into their new location and build up their military headquarters and landing at Lost. It is possible that the Russian army will launch an assault on Finland before it is recognized as a member of. At this time, Finland has not yet been accepted in NATO. According to officials from the Finnish government, Turkey has decided to accept Finland's participation in NATO. Despite Finland's refusal to join NATO, the president of Turkey, Erdogan, who is known to be on good terms with the leader of Russia, Vladimir Putin, does not grant permission for Finland to join NATO. Finland's boundaries will be put under a significant amount of. Finnish officials have asked for a meeting with Turkish President Recep Tayyip, but Turkey has not yet agreed. It would appear that the Russian military has the intention of beginning a new military operation on the borders of Finland prior to Finland joining NATO. If, on the other hand, Russian forces attacked inside Finland's borders, 5 more countries would join the fight and face the Russian army. Earlier, Finland and the Baltic states made a deal to stop Russia from taking over their land again. The Russian danger has at long last been addressed by the Finnish government, which has been a staunch ally of the Ukrainian armed forces ever since the conflict broke out. The Prime Minister of Finland, Sanna Marin, has already said that Putin will keep attacking Ukraine even after he has attacked other Western countries because the Finnish army has gotten closer to the Baltic states and started working with Poland, Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia to prepare for a new Russian invasion. These efforts are being made by Finland in conjunction with the Baltic states' reference for what military actions should be taken to stop a Russian invasion of the area around the Baltic. These 5 countries have started working together to prepare for a potential conflict with Russia by stationing their individual defense systems along the coasts of the Baltic Sea. On the other hand, if the Russian army tried to invade any of these countries, the armies of the other 5 countries would be set right away to help the country being invaded. The presence of Russian troops so close to Finland's borders has not only ratcheted up tensions in Finland, but also in the Baltic. If the Russian army were to attack the borders of Finland, all 5 countries would likely have no choice but to get involved in the conflict. Threats made by Vladimir Putin are driving Finland, which is very interested in joining NATO as soon as it can, to exhaustion. If Finland's application to join NATO is approved, it is thought that Russian President Vladimir Putin will not be able to attack a country that is a member of NATO. Increasing numbers of people think that this is one of Vladimir Putin's strategy. Putin is trying to stop Western countries from helping Ukraine by threatening them with his power and using it to scare them away. One of the first targets that Putin made was the Finland government, which has been a staunch ally of the Ukrainian armed forces from the very beginning of the conflict. In point of fact, we are able to state that Putin is posing a threat to the entirety of Europe with the army that he has dispatched to the border of Finland. But more and more analysts think that Putin doesn't have the guts to attack the borders that have already been built because of the conflict with Ukraine. Russia is now seen as an international pariah. Even Bulgaria, which has said publicly since the conflict started that it won't take a side, has been helping the Ukrainian military in. Because Bulgaria gets its natural gas and energy from Russia, the Bulgarian government had to stay neutral during the conflict. After these statements of the former Prime Minister of Bulgaria, it has been learned that even Bulgaria, which is known as being neutral, supports the Ukrainian army. However, the former Prime Minister of Bulgaria has stated that the Bulgarian army has provided a large number of weapons and ammunition to the Ukrainian. Citation needed. Following these statements of the former Prime Minister of Bulgaria, it has been learned that even Bulgaria supports the Ukrainian army. Well, I'll comply. Putin can count on the support of only a few people. At this point, Belarus, Iran, and Syria are the 3 countries in question. China was unable to provide the support that Russia needed despite the fact that Russia is known to have good relations with. It is a well-known truth that as a direct result of the intervention of the United States and other Western countries, Iran is no longer providing support to Russia. The Israeli government, on the other hand, continues to maintain that Tehran is covertly supporting Russia. Vladimir Zelensky, the leader of the Ukrainian state, has been successful in garnering the support of virtually every Western nation with the policies of his country's foreign. Because of this, the Russian army is experiencing a steady decline in strength. While the Ukrainian army has experienced steady growth throughout the course of the conflict, you can help us out by becoming a subscriber. Since the Ukrainian armed forces have been successful in pushing the Russians back with their attacks, eastern Ukraine has become a critical bend in the conflict in Ukraine. While Russia's fantasy of Kiev is fading day by, eastern Ukraine has become a critical bend in the conflict. The conflicts that are presently concentrated in Bakhmut standout was the first location where the 2 armies' attention was drawn away from one another. The Russian military derives all of its inspiration from the prospect of advancing to Kiev after first breaching the Ukrainian line in Bakh. On the other hand, it is abundantly obvious that the armed forces of the Ukrainian government have an entirely different strategy in mind. In the official statements that have been made public, Ukraine makes it abundantly obvious that it is aiming for Crimea. The situation in Crimea will be the deciding factor in whether or not this conflict will be resolved. The solid steps of the Crimean are seen by all analysts of conflict from the same which has the same view. The narrative of the conflict makes it seem as though operations are taking place behind the scenes. If we take a look at the attacks that the Ukrainian armed forces carried out on Crimea immediately after recapturing Kherson from the Russian army, we will be able to comprehend the progression of the operation in a much clearer and concise manner. Because of the recent attacks, we are able to get a better idea of how the Ukrainian armed forces have been working to perfect their plan, and because we particularly urge you to pay extra attention to these attacks. Let's take a look at each attack on its own and then walk through the steps of how the Crimean plan is supposed to function. Over the past few days, the armed forces of Ukraine have been responsible for 2 significant attacks. The first of these assaults took place in the region surrounding the Russian military aviation base in Gar, which is located in Crimea with a number of separate It appears that the Ukrainian army's assault on one of the biggest military air bases on the peninsula was carried out with the intention of putting an end to Russia's air organizations in Crimea. According to the findings of the official investigation, the drone could not be stopped despite the fact that air defense systems were successful in locating it. A very serious situation was also produced as a result of the criterion in this part of the world. This assault on the core of the Russian armed forces stationed in Crimea was successful. In addition, the assault on Chiron Spit, a strategic location, garnered a lot of attention because, as we can see from the map, Chiron Spit is regarded as the area that is best suited for a naval landing in the Crimea. This is one of the reasons why the attack on Kinburn Spit garnered so much The Ukrainian armed forces announced over the weekend that Russian artillery and multiple launch rocket systems (MLRS) had been destroyed at Chiron Spit around the same time that the military air station in Crimea was taken out of commission. It is also very easy to understand at this point. We will open a point from which individual members of the Russian forces can walk around and circumvent the obstacle after the last Russian troops have been eliminated through direct combat. A very comfortable ground operation will be able to begin. If you consider the equivalent reflections of a person, you will see that we ought to also take into account the eruptions of the last day in Melitopol. This is due to the fact that the simultaneous passing of Kherson and Melitopol under the control of the Ukrainian armed forces will cause the door to Crimea to be open until the very. The Russian force is exercising extreme caution at this time in response to the actions taken against this organization in the Black Sea. The number of missiles aboard the Caliber ships has been increased to 24. On the other hand, we are able to state that these measures are in jeopardy in the field of coastal defense for Ukraine, and the Russian army may be forced to watch helplessly as Crimea is invaded while suffering loss. However, despite the fact that they are taking very serious measures in preparation for this operation, the Ukrainian armed forces are proceeding cautiously. Crimea will almost certainly be the starting point of this conflict. Let's go into a bit more depth about this problem that we're having. In 2014, when Russia took back Crimea and won, it was a turning point for Russian nationalism, which had been growing along with a growing sense of imperial Konski. The lukewarm reaction from the West fed the belief that Putin could invade and get away with territory from Ukraine, which fed the belief that Putin would launch a full-scale invasion in February 2022 after 8 years of hybrid warfare in the Donbass. Putin's successful attacks on Ukraine from 2014 to 2022 may be at least partially attributable to a delayed reaction from the West in general, but the fake reasoning that the Russian president is using to justify this action stems from a deep well of history and images of the country. At this point, we need to shift our attention to the history of Crimea. If we don't fully comprehend the significance of Crimea's past, we won't be able to fully comprehend how the peninsula will serve as a tipping. The Crimea Peninsula, which is situated in the middle of the Black Sea, has long been recognized for its significance as a strategic location. Steppe nomads were the first people to colonize the peninsula, and they did so in several groups and people living in the mountains. In addition to those living in other areas along the northern Black Seashore at the beginning of the 7th century BC, ancient Greeks began colonizing due to the fact that it was ruled by a number of Hellenistic states and later the Byzantine Empire. The culture of Crimea remained predominantly Greek for the next 1,500 years and a half, but at separate periods of life. Additionally, the Caesars, the Pgnes, and other peoples inhabited portions of the peninsula. At various times, Jews have been settling in Crimea since ancient, and today the territory is home to a number of distinct Jewish communities. The main medieval history of Kievan Rus says that in the year 988, the King Prince Vladimir the Great was able to capture the Byzantine city of Charlestonians. At the time, Charlestonians were a part of the Byzantine Empire. This ultimately resulted in Vladimir tying the knot with the Byzantine princess Anna Porogen. However, despite the fact that other medieval sources claim that Vladimir was baptized at his estate close to Kiev a year before the Crimean expedition, the version of the primary narrative that prevailed for the better part of several centuries, nobody knew for certain where the historic ruins was there when the city was finally deserted. As a result of the collapse of the Byzantine Empire, the Golden Horde was successful in their conquest of Crimea. Soon after that, a group of separatists known as the Crimean Khanate took control of the peninsula. Later on, the Crimean Khanate was annexed by the Ottoman Empire as a protectorate because of the peninsula's advantageous geographical position directly bordering Russia's steppes. The Muzars were forced to halt their colonial development as a result of the Crimean Khanate Tatars' use of Crimea as a source of slaves for their invasion of Russia. Some went into the area around the Black Sea. Catherine the Great eventually prevailed over the Ottomans and was able to acquire the Crimean Peninsula in 1783. In subsequent years, the Empress established Seva, which has since grown to become the most populous city in Crimea and the principal home of the Russian Black Sea Fleet. Catherine the Great, like Vladimir Putin, was a history buff and like Putin Putin. She felt the need to legitimize Russia's claim on the peninsula and other areas along Russia's southern border, which she referred to as Novara. Catherine the Great enjoyed. Catherine made an attempt to locate it. In the end, the Arsenio settled in the Crimea close to Sebastopol, and as a result, they staked a claim to the territory of the peninsula based on the fact that the former prince was baptized there and that he won a battle there. Of course, Prince Vladimir was not originally from Moscow, but rather from Kiev. However, at the time the Russian Empire ruled Kiev and portrayed itself as a successor to both Kiev and the Empress also held the belief that Russia was destined to succeed the Byzantine Empire and harbored the desire to win back Constantinople from the Ottomans. As a result, the term Crimea can have two distinct meanings and the administrative structure of the state that was developed under Catherine's rule. It is said to be the location where Russian Christianity was first established, as well as the point of connection between the Byzantine and Russian empires via the historical Kai. Because of Russia's subsequent stance toward Crimea, the region has become significantly more Russian. As a result, as the Russian Empire started to build new cities and relocate Slavi peasants to newly conquered territory, the crown began to seize land from its previous owners and redistribute it among members of the Russian nobility. This occurred at the same time that the Russian Empire began to build new. All of the Crimean Tatars' economic, legal, and government systems were taken over by the Russians. But over thousands of years, the Crimean Peninsula has grown into a place where people of many different races, languages, and religions live together. Along with this, the process of Russification moved faster in the 20th century when Hitler's genocide, Stalin's terror, led to the Holocaust of Crimean Jews, deportation of Crimean Tarts, Armenians, Bulgarian, and Greeks to remote areas. In addition, Crimean Tarts were forced to convert to Orthodox Christianity. When Russia took over Crimea in 2014, the Kremlin used post-Soviet Russia's anger over the country's previous loss of the prized peninsula as a justify. It also used historical and religious reasons to back up the move via a speech he gave on March 18, 2014. Vladimir Putin said that the peninsula was sacred, important to Russia because it was where Vladimir the Great, a prince from Kiev, was said to have been baptized. Putin's speech was delivered on March 18, 2014. Putin believes that Crimea has always been there. When it was transferred to Soviet Ukraine, it was a terrible decision because it had always been a part of Russia. Since this was the case, Russia was basically taken advantage of when the peninsula stayed a part of Ukraine. After the Soviet Union broke up, Putin said that the people of Crimea are hurt by this injustice, and they are especially upset about how the Ukrainian government is trying to make them fit in by taking away their history. And Putin went on to say that the people of Crimea suffer from this injustice and are particularly impressed by these attempts for the people of Crimea. The final insult was the First Revolution, which took place in February of 2014. Because of this, they felt they had to hold a vote on the issue on March 17, 2014, and an overwhelming majority of people used their right to decide for themselves by voting for reunification with Russia on the other. The opinion of the public all over the globe was against this. It was a manifestation of the fantasy that was the world Putin saw. Because of the significance that Putin ascribed to Crimea, he elevated its status to that of the most important territory. If Ukraine is successful in retaking Crimea today, this will be the beginning of the end for Putin because it is impossible to govern without a territory because you gave it so much importance.